With Monster Hunter Wilds on the horizon, we're going back to Monster Hunter World to relive some of the best builds and hunts of the game. So with that, I'm Darcblade with one of the greatest builds for the longsword in Monster Hunter World. Now each episode is dedicated to just one build and are slightly different from the best of the best builds that I've covered in the past, normally featuring alternative versions of them or focusing on builds that have very quirky mechanics. But if you find these videos helpful or informative, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it allows me to make more content like this for not only Monster Hunter World but also the upcoming Monster Hunter Wilds. Now today's build is for the longsword, and it's an alternative version of the Frostcraft build that I've covered in the past. This one focuses more on damage output and bringing down monsters incredibly quickly with raw attack. It does lack defense, but as you're using the longsword, you should have enough defense in the form of your counter attacks. This, combined with the longsword's natural ability to utilize the Frostcraft skill, thanks to Frostcraft synergizing with the special sheath mechanic, makes this an incredibly potent DPS build for the weapon. So for the Frostcraft 2.0 build, you'll need the Rimeguard Helm Gamma, Rimeguard Mail Gamma, the Dragon Claws Beta, the Rimeguard Coil Gamma, and the Rimeguard Greaves Gamma. For your charm, I'm using the Challenger charm, and for my weapon, I'm using the Fatalis Sagas Panon, which is the Fatalis longsword. This has a health regen augmentation and attack increase augmentation attached to it. You could have 2 health regen augmentations attached to this if you feel the health regen with this build is not enough. Obviously the main reason we've taken this longsword is because of its high raw attack more than anything else. As for your specialist tools, these are down to personal preference. I'm using the Rocksteady Mantle and Temporal Mantle for defensive purposes. So when it comes to the decorations, you've got a lot to play with, but as we are focusing on a DPS build, they will be DPS focused. So I've gone for attack jewels to max out attack boost, critical jewels to max out crit boost, vitality jewels to max out health boost, a protection jewel for a point in the divine blessing skill, tenderizer jewels to max out weakness exploit, expert jewels to max out critical eye, a resistor jewel for a point in the blight resistance skill, and then finally a sharp jewel for a point in the protective polish skill. As for the jewels on your mantles, for the Rocksteady Mantle I've gone for protection jewels to max out divine blessing, and then for the decorations on the temporal mantle I've gone for dragon jewels to give us a few points in dragon attack. But this is purely optional in all honesty. So if you've done what I've done here, you'll have a build with 150 health, 100 stamina, which will be 200 health and 150 stamina when you've taken all of your food buffs. You have a raw attack of 1290, which will be even more when other skills like Coalescence, Agitator are in effect. You have a sliver of purple sharpness, which you can burn through quite quickly but is slightly alleviated with protective polish. You have 15% base affinity, which can be 85% affinity when you're taking into account weakness exploit and the agitator buff. You have a dragon rating of 150, but this isn't an elemental build, so you don't have to worry about this too much. And you'll have high Elder Seal. You also have a strong defense of 1121. That is strong against water and ice, but unfortunately weak to the other elements, especially fire. So when it comes to the skills, first of all you'll have attack boost at level 7, increasing the raw attack of this build, and at level 4 or above grants us a bonus 5% base affinity to the build. If you wanted to play around with some other stats or include some more quality of life skills, you can drop this down to level 4 if you wish. You'll then have critical eye at level 7, increasing the base affinity of this build, helping counter the negative affinity found on the Fatalis weapons. You'll then have agitator at level 5, which is a buff that kicks in whenever a monster becomes enraged, which can easily be done when utilizing the clutch claw and flint shot mechanics. When this buff activates, you'll gain increased raw attack and base affinity. You'll then have health boost at level 3, allowing our health to get to a maximum of 200 instead of just 150. You'll then have ice attack at level 3, a byproduct of this build in all honesty. It's not really needed, and as we're not using an ice weapon, it is kind of wasted. But anyway, next up is critical boost at level 3, which is a skill that whenever we crit a monster, our attacks will deal increased damage, but only applies to the raw portion of an attack, not the elemental or ailment portion. But as this is a raw attack build, this is an essential skill. You'll then have weakness exploit at level 3, giving us 30% affinity when we're attacking monster weak points, and should these weak points be tenderized through clutch claw attacks first, this bonus affinity is increased to 50%. You then have focus at level 3, which is not the most essential skill for the longsword in all honesty, but it helps charge up our spirit gauge a little bit more quickly. It's also a byproduct of the armor set we're wearing. You'll then have critical draw at level 3, which allows our drawn attacks to have 100% affinity, and as the longsword has access to a lot of drawn attacks thanks to the whole special sheath, this is actually quite useful. You then have peak performance at level 3, granting us bonus raw attack so long as we have full health. You'll then have quick sheath at level 3, an essential quality of life skill for the longsword that allows us to sheath our weapon more quickly, not only when we put the weapon on our back, but also when we perform the special sheath. You'll then have coalescence at level 3, which is a skill that whenever we remove a blight or ailment from our hunter, we'll gain increased raw attack, elemental attack, and status build up. And as a lot of endgame monsters utilize statuses or ailments, coalescence can be activated quite often. Next up is blight resistance at level 1, a kind of optional skill in all honesty. You don't have to take this if you don't want to, but blight resistance, at least at level 1, reduces the duration of blights on our hunter. The reason I've taken this is just having blight resistance at level 1 means that blights normally wear off in a decent amount of time and reduces the need to actually manually sheath our weapons, take null berries, so on and so forth. This means that we can also trigger coalescence more quickly as well. You'll then have resuscitate at level 1, which is a byproduct of the armor, but it's a useful defensive and quality of life skill, as when we are inflicted by a blight or ailment, we'll gain increased invincibility frames when dodging, as well as reduced stamina consumption. You'll then have Divine Blessing at level 1, which can be potentially level 3 when we're wearing the Rocksteady mantle, potentially giving us a chance at taking reduced damage should we take a hit from a monster. You'll then have Protected Polish at level 1, which is a wonderful buff when it comes to sharpness issues on weapons. Protected Polish allows us to put a protective coating over our sharpness gauge after sharpening a weapon, preventing any sharpness loss for a small duration of time. And then finally you'll have Dragon Attack at level 2 for wearing the Temporal Mantle, increasing the dragon rating of this weapon slightly. Again, this is an optional skill, you can replace this with something else if you so wish. Now, as for the set bonuses, you have 2 of them. First of all, you'll have Critical Element for wearing 2 pieces of the Velkhana armor. Critical Element is a skill that when we crit a monster, it will do increased elemental damage to the monster, so think of it like Critical Boost, but for the elemental portions of your attacks. And then finally, and the more important skill, is the Frostcraft set bonus for wearing 4 pieces of the Velkhana armor. Frostcraft is the skill that gives us another gauge underneath our stamina next to our sharpness bar. This bar will fill up whilst our weapon is sheathed, and this also applies to the special sheath in the case of the longsword. This bar basically allows us to deal more damage by increasing our raw attack and elemental attack. However, with each attack, it will drain the bar, slowly reducing the effect and reducing the amount of bonus damage we get until we sheath our weapon again and let it refill. So sometimes, especially in the case with the longsword, as it can utilize Frostcraft with its special sheath, it's sometimes good to leave your hunter in the special sheath position to regain your Frostcraft gauge rather than attacking straight away. But there we have it, that is the Frostcraft version 2.0 build for the longsword. Now every build out there has pros and cons, no build is perfect. Even the strongest builds out there, they may have some downsides that aren't noticeable at first. Now with this build, the biggest pro is its damage output. Able to bring down monsters quickly, thanks to the sheer amount of DPS skills this build has combined with the Frostcraft gauge. The next pro for this build is the Frostcraft gauge itself combined with the longsword. The weapon combined with the skill synergize really well thanks to the special sheath, which is a key part of the longsword rotation, being able to replenish and reapply the Frostcraft buff very easily. And then finally, the last build is that this is a raw attack build, and thus it can be used against pretty much any monster in the game, regardless of their resistances. The exception may be Alatreon, but that's a different story. But unfortunately, there are cons. The 2 major cons for this build include the fact that this build does lack defensive skills, but this is made up for the fact that the longsword doesn't really need them, so long as you've mastered the longsword's counter-attack mechanics. And the other con is, unfortunately, there are times that this build will have sharpness issues. It can burn through sharpness quite quickly, even with the likes of Protected Polish on the build. But if you're looking for a fun DPS build to take down monsters quite quickly, and you like to use the Frostcraft skill, then I would strongly recommend this build. It has some of the highest damage output in the game for the longsword, which for some players will make up for the fact that it does have fewer defensive skills and quality of life skills. But what are your thoughts? Please leave a comment down below. And until next time, I've been Darcblade, bringing you the Frostcraft version 2.0 build for the longsword in Monster Hunter World. Hope you enjoyed the video, thanks for watching, subscribe and like for more.